Has plank pose become too easy for you? If so, you're far from alone. Many people find that once they practice plank pose enough times, their body simply adapts to the load of plank. And it's kind of like we could just hang out here and plank pose all day and just not much is happening. And it's not very challenging. So, if we'd like to keep this foundational pose challenging and interesting, it can be super helpful to bring in some great variations on plank pose. So, with that said, here are my 5 favorite plank variations. My first favorite plank variation is called leg sweeps, where we lift one leg up, sweep it out to the side, bring it as far forward as we're able to, and then we reverse that. We lift it up, sweep it back, and place that foot back down. And it's a great way to work this moving hip through a full range of motion. So we do hip extension, hip abduction, hip flexion to bring it forward. And then we reverse that hip flexion, abduction, and extension. And then we can place that foot down. So it's a great challenge for that moving hip. It's also a great challenge for the standing hip because when we lift one leg off the floor, we're instantly almost like doubling the load on that standing hip. So it's a great challenge to the hips and also the core, and just an excellent way to bring some variety and more challenge into plank pose. Make sure when you do the leg sweeps that for the maximum challenge benefit, you hold everything super still and don't let yourself shift off to the side as that leg sweeps forward. So it's like nothing else should change except just that leg is moving. My second favorite plank variation is called plank hop switches. And we set this one up with our arms like usual, hands about shoulder distance apart, but then we take our feet wider than they usually are in plank. So feet wider than about hip distance. And then we kind of switch where our hands and our feet are, where we go feet toward one another and hands away from one another, and then feet apart and hands toward one another. And we switch hands and feet at the same time like that. And it's a great challenge because it's a coordination challenge, like figuring out how to move our arms and our legs like in opposite directions at the same time. And it's also a great opportunity to work explosively in plank pose. So like with more speed, because we never do that when we hold traditional plank pose statically. My third favorite plank variation is called plank to bear pose walks. And I really like to do this one with a yoga block. That's optional, but it actually kind of makes it more challenging. So the block goes across my low back, and then I step back and I start in plank pose. Then I walk my feet just kind of little steps forward until I get to bear pose, which is like a knees hovering tabletop. And then I walk back, little steps back to plank pose. So it's a little back and forth movement like this. And once again, I like the block because it really helps us control the movement more. It's like we don't want the block to wobble in space, and we definitely don't want the block to fall off. So it's just there to help keep everything just like nice and still as we just walk the feet forward and back. So it's a great challenge and a great way to bring in more variety to plank. My fourth favorite plank variation is plank to forearm plank back to plank. And it looks like this. We start in plank, and then moving with control, we lower one forearm and then the other. So like nice and slowly and controlled, and then we're in forearm plank. Then we plant one hand and then the other, so we're back up in plank pose. And this is a great way to incorporate more upper body pushing strength, more of a challenge in terms of that, like pushing through the upper body. It's a great way to bring that into plank pose because we don't do that too much when we're just kind of propped here in our static plank. But when we have to bend the elbows and push away from the floor, then we get to work more of that pushing strength. The other thing I like about it is that in forearm plank, we actually challenge our anterior core or our abdominals. We challenge them more than we do in regular plank pose. So we get to kind of touch in on a little bit more of an anterior core challenge by bringing in those visits to forearm plank. My final favorite plank variation is plank on fingertips. And it looks something like this. So we start in regular plank, and then we bring one hand up onto the fingertips. And if that goes well, then maybe we add the other hand too. And we hold plank pose up on our fingertips instead of plank pose on flat hands. And I like this variation because it asks our finger flexors to work, which is really nice for a change. And it also challenges our wrists in a unique way. They're in a neutral position rather than extension, and we get to challenge them there. So it's a really great way to isometrically target the wrist flexors and the wrists, and just a nice complementary way to load this area of the body when, if all the planks we do is in wrist extension like this, then this gives us a chance to load differently.